once I became aware that I was prioritizing everybody else and kind of leaving myself, giving myself leftovers, and I started to change that, some relationships deepened and people understood the new boundaries I was setting, and some of them fell off because we were both, I guess, getting something out of that old dynamic that I had. And if they were no longer getting what they wanted, it didn't really make sense anymore. So I think the fall off is to be expected when you're making changes like that. And it does, again, if you struggle with guilt around setting boundaries or changing your mind or making those decisions, that guilt can kick in and make you question if you've made the right decisions. And so that has been a struggle, but the more that I've done it, the more confidence I've built. And once you can reap the benefits of setting those boundaries and making those decisions, it becomes very clear, oh, I did the right thing. I'm going to keep doing it. It makes it a little bit easier the next time, and so on. Awesome.
Welcome, everyone, to the Vegan Posse Self-Love series, which is dedicated to expanding our tenderness, affection, curiosity, and general delight in one very important animal, ourselves. So, as you all know, my novel, Marrying Myself, explores the concept of honoring and loving ourselves. And while it's a fictional story, it's got a revolutionary message of self-love. I'm now in the process of creating a Marrying Myself companion guide, which will be sort of a self-love playbook. I decided to take advantage of the wealth of wisdom of our previous guests, and I've invited a number of them to be part of this special series to discuss what self-love is to them. Today, I'm thrilled to have the innovative, down-to-earth, and super funny Delanie Fischer. Delanie is the host of the wildly popular Self-Helpless podcast. She's also a comedy writer, activist, and a business consultant, helping artists, entrepreneurs, and small businesses increase their revenue, visibility, and efficacy using unconventional approaches. So, Delanie, welcome back to the Vegan Posse.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love being here.
Yay!
Nice.
Well, as you may recall, I start regular Vegan Posse episodes off by asking people if they're ready for the ride of their life. But for this special series, I would like to ask, are you ready for the love of your life?
Ooh, I love it. Yeah, let's do it. Let's dig in.
So tell me a little about your own journey of self-love. Is self-love something that you think about?
Yeah, I think self-love, the definition of it for me, and how I apply it to myself and my life has changed over time. Like currently, right now, self-love is allowing myself to do what I want to do in the moment. I am a recovering perfectionist, workaholic, overachiever, all the things. And I used to push through and kind of force myself to do things, even if my body was tired, or even if I didn't want to, or I like uphold myself to these like self-imposed timelines and deadlines that don't actually need to be, worked on at that moment. So like, for example, today, I just moved into a new home with my husband and my two rescued doggies, Maverick and Goose. And I have a lot of self-imposed deadlines and projects that I'd like to accomplish this week. But today, I'm just going to allow myself to enjoy setting up the new home and not stress over the fact that I should be doing a million other things for work. And so that to me is what self-love looks like currently, is listening to what I actually want to do in the moment and not ignoring my excitement or needs or desires. But I think that's just changed over time. So yeah. That's what it's like looking like now.
Yeah, I love it. Well, congratulations on your new home. That sounds
Thank
very exciting.
you.
And
Thank you
moving
so
is
much.
never easy. So I'm
Yes,
sure self-love goes a long way in easing
y-
that process and making it more enjoyable.
absolutely. Yes, lots to do, but I'm going to try to flow through it.
Right, right,
Yes,
right.
yes,
And that makes sense. So it sounds like for you, self-love is dynamic, which makes total
yes.
sense because how can anything that's important ever stay the same for our whole lives?
Definitely. And I'm just coming off of a period of time where self-love for me was just a lot of rest and a lot of like trauma work and therapy and support groups. That's what self-love, it wasn't about working out every day or accomplishing tasks. It was really just sleep and listen to my body and dig into some things from my past that I had been avoiding and not processing at the time. So, yeah, it really does change with every transition, I feel like, for me.
Yeah, and again, that makes total sense. Just like regular love, other types of love, sometimes it's a little tougher, sometimes it's a little
Hmm.
gentler and more lighthearted. So
Definitely.
I think that's a great thing to point out. So as a lot of people know, I'm in grad school currently to become a therapist. And for my
Amazing.
yeah, yeah. So
Awesome.
and the end is in sight. I'm going to be starting my internship in May. So I'm getting there, and I'm
Very
currently
cool.
taking a research class. And so for this project that I'm working on now, I decided to do some formal research on the concept of self-love to find out if it's a real thing or if it's just kind of a fluff concept.
So cool.
So what I've discovered is that some of the major research has boiled self-love down to three components. So I thought maybe you and I could discuss those three components and you can talk a little about if they, if there's something you relate to and how you practice them.
Sure. Sounds great.
So this first component of self-love, as identified in some of the peer-reviewed research, the first component is self-contact, which is defined as giving attention to oneself. Why don't I go through? I'll list all three, and then we can talk about them one by one.
Perfect.
So self-contact, defined as giving attention to oneself. Number two is self-acceptance, defined as being at peace with oneself, and self-care, defined as being protective of and caring for oneself. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about where you are with each of these components. Why don't we start with
Sure.
the self-contact or the
Okay, so
self-attention?
I love this. Giving attention, this just pops into my mind because I did it maybe 10 minutes before we got on this call. I'm in my pajamas, but I put a little blouse over my pajamas and I put a necklace on that's a little locket that has my great grandparents' photos in it
Mm.
and put a little bit of blush on. And to me, that was, it doesn't have to be all or nothing when it comes to attention to myself. I don't have to spend an hour getting myself ready and curling my hair and, putting on all the things, but I can take, 3 to 5 minutes and make myself feel like I gave myself the attention that I wanted in order to feel excited and ready for this conversation and to show up, right? So just those little things. That's what came to mind for me for attention. I didn't I didn't have a full, workout routine or yoga routine this morning. Again, I'm amidst a move, so it's a little chaotic. But I took 3 minutes before our call to just sit in this chair and meditate just for a few minutes, which I like to do before my calls. So you get the freshest version of me, clear as head, right? So that came to mind for me. Just I have struggled with all or nothing or black and white thinking before, and I like to ask myself, what's the happy medium? What would make this easy? What if it was easy to get ready today and still feel really good and feel cute or whatever? And that's the kind of attention I'm giving to myself in this moment because that's what I need. So yeah, happy to
Yeah.
expand on anything, but yeah.
That's fabulous. And I relate to that so much. And even just the whole process of how you went about giving yourself attention. It was a fun process. It wasn't work.
Right.
It wasn't like you had to come
Exactly.
up with some dramatic, labor intensive way of tending to yourself. It was just a little, easy self-care, like letting it be easy. And I relate a
Exactly.
lot to meditation being part of self-contact and self-attention, because I noticed for me, when I first established a regular daily meditation practice, which was over a decade ago at this point, but I just remember
Yeah.
being very surprised that one of the outcomes of that daily practice, I had expected certain results, even though you're not supposed to expect any results with with meditation. But I had
Sure.
anticipated, some of the more predictable ones, like lessening anxiety and just, being calmer and more clear-headed, maybe sparking some creativity.
Yeah.
But one of the unexpected consequences for me was I just felt better about myself. And
Mm,
it was very curious, but for me, I boiled it down to I'm actually spending quality time with me, because how can
I
I
love
love
that.
myself
Yes.
if I'm not spending quality time with myself? And so sitting there for that period of time in the morning just with me really went a long way. So I love that you mentioned one of my favorite self-love practices.
It's
It
so
seems
good.
like a lot of successful people do meditate. Has that
Yeah.
been a big part of your self-love, it sounds like?
Yes, I've been trying to get more into it the last year or so, really, and really being consistent with daily, even if it's 30 seconds. I mean,
Yeah,
and sometimes I have 10 minutes, sometimes I have 20, sometimes I have 30 seconds, and it just depends. But there
right.
is something I notice a significant difference on the days that I don't meditate in any way. I'm more reactive, I'm more stressed, I have a hard time letting things roll off my back, all of that. And even just a couple minutes, I feel like I can flow through my day so much
Mm,
better. And I make better decisions and I take better care of myself just naturally.
yeah.
So it's incredible. And I think, yeah, like you nailed it when you read about people's daily routines or whatever it is who have reached some kind of success that maybe you're excited to achieve. Meditation or some kind of practice like that is usually part of it. So I think that says a lot. So yeah,
Agreed. Yeah,
it doesn't have to
yeah,
be perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. And that's
right.
something I tell myself all the time because I have to remind myself, doesn't have to be perfect. Just do a little bit.
Right,
A little
right.
nugget of meditation.
Right, right. And that sounds like another kind of self-care practice that you have in place, is just those little reminders to yourself, like not harsh reprimands, but gentle reminders.
Exactly. And perfection doesn't even exist. What do you try? You can't,
Right. I
even if
know.
you
What
did
would
have
that even look like?
right, even
Yeah.
if you had 30 minutes to do everything, it wouldn't be perfect. Something would go, something would happen. Maybe the dogs would interrupt you. Something would happen.
Something. Yeah.
I love that. I don't know if you saw that documentary Stutz on Netflix, but
Uh-uh.
the therapist or psychologist that it's Jonah Hill and his practitioner, um, he talks about how everything that you do is like a pearl out of a pearl necklace, and something about how it's like there is a little piece of poop in every pearl or on every pearl or something, where basically nothing is perfect, and so just expect for there to be a little bit of shit in your pearl
Right.
in your pearl necklace. And I love that. It's like, okay, great, takes the pressure off. There's
It
nothing that's going to be
does.
perfect at
Yeah.
all. Just expect it, and you can find it and be like, oh, to be expected, you know.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. That's a great analogy. Yeah, and for me, just letting this moment, like this very moment with all its
Yes.
unpredictableness and so-called imperfections, like letting that be
Right.
enough. Like
Right.
why is something inside me so eager to decide that no, this is not enough. It should be different.
Right. Right. Exactly. Totally agree.
All right, so let's talk about the second component of self-love as identified in this psych research, being self-acceptance.
Mm, so
Where are
good.
you with self-acceptance?
Yeah, I think for me it's really been about how can I work with myself instead of against it? How can I just, yeah, accept
Mm.
that, all the habits that I have or the way that I like to do things is probably not going to change. I'm almost 34. Some things are kind of set in
So
stone.
old, Delanie. So old. Oh my goodness.
Some things are kind of set in stone or would be a lot harder to change. And so instead of changing myself, how can I work with myself? For example, I'll just go with things that are happening to me, today, this week. Um, with my podcast, because I'm now hosting it by myself. I used to have co-hosts. Doing the intro and outro, we used to just kind of show up and bounce off of each other, about the introductions and all that kind of stuff. And now, as a solo host, I like to write little bullet points to myself for the introduction so I don't miss any parts,
Mhm.
because I don't have other people that are bringing up their favorite things from the episode. And so I need to do that for myself because when I
Mhm.
show up, I'm not going to remember, 5 to 10 things that we talked about. And so it's like working with myself in that way. I tried to show up to the podcast the way that I used to with no notes for something like that, and realized, the old way of doing it, maybe I had 2 or 3 bullet points and other people had 2 or 3 bullet points, and it ended up being a well-rounded introduction of the episode. But now I don't have that, so I have to do something a little bit different. And instead of trying to force myself to do it maybe how other people do it, I just said I'm just going to be somebody who brings a few notes to my intro for the episode, instead of working against myself trying to be this person who can memorize 10 different things. So it's little tweaks like that of, it's okay that I need this little tool now that I didn't used to need, and I'm going to allow myself to have it. And it doesn't mean that I suck at my job. So it's just little things like that, and applying that to every area of my life. That just because other people might do it this way doesn't mean that I have to do it. And there's nothing wrong with me if my brain works a little bit differently for that
Exactly.
project. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And while there may have been a great deal of charm in that more improvisational, style,
Yeah.
there's, I think, I've listened to some of your intros to your podcast since you've been
Mm,
hosting solo, and there's definitely a reflection and just a consideration that I appreciate. I like
awesome.
hearing something and recognizing, oh, she put some thought into this. She's
Oh,
not
thank
just
you.
like swooping
Yeah.
in on the fly. So,
Exactly. There's
yeah.
pros and cons to anything. And I just try to look at what's the upside of this new way of doing things, and how can I
Right.
get excited about it? And exactly.
Right. So for you, how do you balance the need for self-acceptance with the desire to try your best and, push your limits?
Mm. Self-acceptance and pushing my limits. I think right now it's really about just letting things go. I will try my best, but not to the point where I'm making myself sick over it the way that I used to.
Mm, mm,
As a workaholic, I'll just take a podcast episode, for example. If you listen to a podcast, you have to give notes on your podcast or something, or you have to edit it or something like that. The example of maybe combing through once or twice and then you're done, versus maybe old me would have combed through 5 different times and taken out every and every and every right. And so it's kind of just what's good enough, and let the rest go.
mm.
And I think for me it's just about that perfectionism. I'm just kind of using the podcast as an example since we're podcasting right now. And so yeah, I think that's the happy medium. I'm going to try my best. I am going to take out certain things that don't need to be in there because I value the listener experience and I don't want to maybe waste their time with me searching for something that I was going to say, and 45 seconds or a minute has gone by. We can take that out. That's easy. But am I going to take out every or whatever else? No. So what's the happy medium? I'm trying my best, but I'm also allowing myself to be human. And I think yeah, that's the example that came to mind.
That that makes sense. And actually, now that I think about it, maybe a better way to phrase that question is more about recognizing your own limits, because our
Right.
limits are what they are. We are who we are. Like you said,
Right.
I'm older than you. And so I'm very in touch with that reality. Like maybe I'd love to be different in some, imaginary universe, but I am the way I am. So
And which is great. And like, how can you work with yourself instead of,
yeah.
make yourself feel bad that you're not living up to some vague expectation that nobody can, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. I remember I used to have such a hard time with this concept because I was so like you, I was so immersed in the self-help world and so
Yeah.
fascinated by it. I still love that world and the idea that we can, become better and better without limits. And I do think that's true in some ways, but at the same time, we can't change who we are. And I remember
Right.
in my Buddhist learnings at the meditation center where I used to go in New York City. I remember one time hearing about how in Buddhism they teach that self-improvement is great, striving, trying to be better, like all fantastic, do what you can, do what you want to do, go for
Right.
it. But at the end of the day, the amount we're going to be able to change is minuscule. So the
Yeah.
much bigger ticket item when it came to enlightenment is self-acceptance. And I
Right.
just remember thinking, huh, that's interesting. Part of me resisted that concept, but then part of me realized, I've been trying to change a lot of things about myself for a long time and they really haven't budged very much. So maybe
Yeah.
just like you said, working with those aspects of myself and my personality would serve me much better than trying to change or become better. I think it's one thing to become better, but to become different is kind of another
Exactly.
animal. Yeah.
Exactly. Another thing comes to mind is I definitely recovering people pleaser too. Yay. I just got a bundle of things that I'm recovering from. And so when I have an important conversation, and we're trying to reach some kind of resolution, whoever I'm speaking with, I have a tendency to prioritize that person's needs and feelings in the conversation. And I know that about myself. And instead of trying to change myself, so we reach a resolution, I just bring a couple bullet points to the conversation or a little sticky note that reminds myself, hey, remember the goal of this conversation is to actually come up with a solution for X, and that is very helpful. So because I know that about myself, that is conditioning in me that is
Mhm.
not going to probably ever go away. It might
Mhm.
improve, but I'm going to need little reminders that,
Mhm.
at one point it served me very well to prioritize the person's needs on the other end of the conversation and to completely ignore my own needs and feelings. And that doesn't serve me anymore. And how can I be gentle with myself with just a little reminder like, hey, it's okay if you fall into your people pleasing in this conversation, it's okay, but let's circle back to the reason why we had the phone call or the conversation to begin with. And those are the little things that I have to do. And I'm not going to change into a completely different person. It's just not going to happen.
It's not going
And
to happen.
what's
Yeah.
that little nugget I can give to myself to just make sure I'm taking care of myself the best way that I can with the tools that I have right now, and just be nice about it to me. Be nice to me.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So many nuggets came out to me from those comments that you made just now. Number one, I love I love that you clearly do some planning.
Mhm.
You plan for yourself. So
Yes.
you know enough about yourself to know that that's helpful. And so you take time
Right.
out to do it. So to me, that right there shows some real self-love.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just the idea that we can make things easier on ourselves. Like,
Right.
like maybe you could manage to buck that conditioning at some point and learn how to have an effective conversation without
Right.
those little notes and reminders. But why? Who cares?
Right.
Who cares? Like
Exactly.
if it's easier and more pleasant and usually more effective for you to go in there with that little crutch, which,
Exactly.
it just makes total sense. So
I
I
might be, I make, yeah, I might be 90 years old bringing my post-it notes to the conversation. I'm fine with that. That's okay.
who
It sounds like I just
cares?
have to invest in having post-it notes in my home at all times.
And probably a lot of other people on the planet would be well served by having similar post-it notes with similar
Right.
reminders.
Right. It's like that willingness to be imperfect and be human so you get a more desirable outcome. Like I
Right.
know that because of my people pleasing tendencies, there's certain situations where I can be taken advantage of or allow myself to be taken advantage of or just not say speak up and to no fault of the other person. So I just need that little reminder like, hey, remember, you matter too. That's really what those reminders are. Your
Yeah.
feelings matter, your needs matter also.
Yes, yes. It's so funny because when you say it like that, it sounds so logical and it just makes so much intuitive sense. And it's so funny how easy it is to forget in the moment.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So, this third component of self love is self care, defined as being protective of and caring for yourself. So,
Mm.
Delanie, how do you practice self care?
Right now, well, what you mentioned being protective of myself, this is really interesting because I've had to set a lot of new boundaries in the last several months. Physical boundaries and just energetic boundaries, I guess you could call them. And so actually setting them and sticking to them and learning more about that boundaries does having a boundary doesn't make you a bad person or a mean person or a selfish person. And if you've had any conditioning around uh basically being punished for having your own needs and boundaries and ideas that are maybe different to somebody else's or maybe what they wanted for you, that is really hard to set them as an adult and not feel really guilty about it. So that's what comes to mind. Again, not perfect at it. I have to remind myself just, that one little nugget of what is the purpose of setting this boundary and how can I hold to it even if I'm too scared to come to a conversation. Maybe I can send a text. It's just what's the next best thing. I know there's this ideal
Hmm.
situation where I'm a completely different person and I know exactly what my boundaries are and I uphold them and I'm really great at it and very direct, but sometimes that's going to fall through. And so, yeah, I guess just boundaries in my relationships, also with my relationship with work. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a specific example that's happened recently. I guess a good one would be I recently got a new job that I really am loving. It's with a nonprofit where I get to contribute to these really fun campaigns that help animals and the planet and all that stuff. And I also got my first publishing deal around the same time. And I have the podcast. So I had just had a lot of I went from having just a couple things to do to having too many jobs unexpectedly. And a big boundary was that I had to talk to my boss and basically let them know what was going on and ask for less hours, which old Delanie probably would have tried to juggle everything until, she hit a wall and physically couldn't do anything anymore and had really bad burnout. But I caught it beforehand. I asked for part-time hours, handful of hours a week, and I was able to do that. So that was, a boundary with my schedule and my relationship with work and my time. And it's those little things that old me probably wouldn't have been able to do or do as easily. So yeah, that's a more specific example of something recent.
That's beautiful. And congratulations on all these cool things that you're doing,
Thank,
that you have
thank
going
you.
on.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
What would you say are your biggest challenges to self-love?
Oh, um, I keep coming back to the perfectionism thing because it seems to really be an
Mm,
underlying issue. and it's woven into everything that I do. And even if I'm allowing myself to release it in the moment, it's still in the back of my head as a little voice. So, um, yeah, that's sorry, what was the question?
I was asking, I mean, you've talked a little about this, but what would you
Yeah.
say your biggest challenges to
Oh,
self-love are? I mean, you
it
talked about the people pleasing and the perfectionism. Are there any others that come to mind?
I really think that's it. I think the people
Yeah.
pleasing is also part of the perfectionism. It's
Mm.
I I think there was just a lot of external factors, me growing up, that being sweet and perfect and highly accomplished was helpful to other people and seen as valuable to other people. And so I have had to undo a lot of those things and try to figure out what do I actually want versus what did other people want for me. And that's been really hard to untangle because sometimes it's both. Like for example, writing this whole publishing thing. I'm writing a card deck with a little book companion, and it's going to be vegan themed, so I'm excited. And I do want to do that. It is an accomplishment, but I also want to do it, and I have to check in with myself. It's like if I am I just mindlessly trying to collect accomplishments still for some kind of external validation, or is it something that I really want to do? And so I have to ask myself those questions still. And so, yes, no, I really want to do this. It aligns with my values. It's something creative. It's something that I can do in my own time. It's a flexible schedule. So I have to go through this checklist to really make sure it's me wanting it and not my conditioning wanting it. And so, that's kind of a current example. And then sometimes I go through the checklist and I'm like, this is not lining up. I don't actually want this. This is old me kicking in because old me feels more valuable or seen or loved if I collect accomplishments. And so I'm going to say no to this one because it doesn't actually tick my personal boxes of what I'm looking for.
Mm.
So that's just hard. I mean, becoming aware of it was hard. Filtering things through it is hard. And so I think that's just going to be it's going to be ever evolving, but that's the answer that came to mind for that one.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how would you say that prioritizing yourself and your own self-love has affected your relationships and your work life?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Well, I don't know if anybody resonates with this, but as once I became aware that I was prioritizing everybody else and kind of leaving myself, giving myself leftovers, and I started to change that, some relationships deepened and people understood the new boundaries I was setting, and some of them fell off because we were both, I guess, getting something out of that old dynamic that I had. And if they were no longer getting what they wanted, it didn't really make sense anymore. So I think the fall off is to be expected when you're making changes like that. And it does, again, if you struggle with guilt around setting boundaries or changing your mind or making those decisions, that guilt can kick in and make you question if you've made the right decisions. And so that has been a struggle, but the more that I've done it, the more confidence I've built. And once you can reap the benefits of setting those boundaries and making those decisions, it becomes very clear, oh, I did the right thing. I'm going to keep doing it. It makes it a little bit easier the next time and so on. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's hard in the beginning, but I think it's like building a muscle with anything else. It can get easier, especially if you learn what works for yourself, whether it's bringing a post-it note to a conversation or having a reminder on your wall or your desk or something in your notes app on your phone. Um, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. And how does veganism relate to your process of self-love?
This is so interesting because in the very beginning, when I kind of was dabbling with eating more plant-based and stuff, it was self-love in the sense of, oh, I want to eat nutritious food for my body, right? So that's an act of self-love. And then when I really got into it, it was actually very funny. I had become very minimalistic in my life. I went, with the whole decluttering minimalism process, and I loved it. And I wanted to simplify other areas of my life. And so I had been hearing all of these different conflicting things about food and what is best for what's optimal for human health and what's good for the environment and all this stuff. And I was just wanting more simplicity. It actually wasn't really about health so much at the time, or animals, or the environment. It was for I guess for my own mental health. Is I'm tired of being confused and getting all this different information. And so I just went down a hole one day of listening to every TED talk I could find, a bunch of podcast episodes, watching documentaries about it. And for me, all roads led back to going vegan. I mean, every argument against it was easily debunked by information that I would find, and or studies, evidence, right? Scientific
Right.
evidence. And so that made everything simple in my head of like, oh, I'm just going to do this because again, it ticks a million boxes that I care about. Good for my health, good for animals, good for the environment. Let's do it. And it was actually kind of part of my minimalism journey to do that for myself. And then, of course, I got more passionate about, I started feeling the health benefits of it, everything from completely reversing my Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, to clearing up my acne. I mean, my skin cleared in under a week. I mean, it was just unreal. My digestive issues went away. Everything. And so, okay, now I was passionate about the health benefits, then reading more about all the animals that are being saved by it and how it's better for the environment. Then it's hard not to become really passionate about it, because
Right.
okay, I can do it and stick to it. That's great. And now I feel really good. And it also aligns with my values of wanting to live as compassionate of a life as possible, and to reduce harm. So yeah, that's kind of, but it started off as not really like that at all.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I relate to that experience a lot, that just in the sense that veganism, unlike some other issues, the more I researched and the more rabbit holes I went down, the more corroboration I found for this
Yes.
way of living.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Is the more that I researched, the more clarity I had.
Right.
Where sometimes the more you research and all these different perspectives and opinions, it can muddle what you were trying to find, the answers you were trying to find. And it was totally the opposite with this. You're absolutely right. That
Yeah.
was very helpful. Yes.
Right, right,
Yes.
right. And kind of like you were talking about with setting boundaries and working that muscle and the motivation that you find for doing more of that once you start experiencing the positive payoffs. I definitely felt that with health as well. Like once you get a
Yeah.
taste of what it feels like to feel good in your body, and good in a way that maybe you didn't even have any conception of prior to going vegan. You didn't even know necessarily that you felt
Absolutely.
bad.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, exactly. If you always feel bad, you don't really know what good feels like,
right,
right? You don't, yeah,
right,
exactly. Oh yeah, everything from more energy to, I don't know about you, this is a weird one, but like my body odor stopped
I
smelling. I
remember
mean,
you talking about that.
what is
Yeah.
up with that? I
And
mean, just the
yeah.
weirdest things that my hair and nails were growing faster.
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
it was such an eye-opening experience of what the heck, what else is out there that I don't know about, that I've
right,
been told something totally opposite my whole life. And for
right,
me, it was like I had this insatiable desire to learn after I started implementing these things that improved my life so much. I'm like, what else is out there? And then I'm excited about meditation. Let's learn about that. Yeah.
right.
So, mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, a great rabbit hole, like an
Yes,
exciting
yes.
rabbit hole.
Yes.
Yeah, a limitless one. Um, so you're a public figure, you've got this podcast, you do stand-up comedy, or at least you used to do that professionally. I mean, you've been
Yeah.
on all kinds of, high profile stages and venues and forums. What's it like going through the process of self-discovery and self-growth in public?
Oh gosh. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's awful. I mean, it's both. I think another big thing that I'm trying to do as far as self-love or acceptance is just realizing everything is gray area in a lot of ways as far as how I might feel about something. Um, where there's some really, really high moments, there's some really low moments, there's some neutral moments when it comes to that. I think um like in the beginning of starting the podcast with my friends, people were really appreciative of how much we were sharing and how vulnerable we were being. And that is what grew the podcast so early on. And then the other side of it is when you are that open and that vulnerable, you might say something that impacts your personal life because somebody heard you say something that they're not happy with, right? So there's kind of two sides of this a lot of the time. Of on one hand, it's reaching a lot of people and helping a lot of people, but there might be some personal sacrifice involved with doing so. So it's not, and then you try to find a happy medium of how can I share enough to help people, but how can I also share where I don't have to share too much in order to hurt myself in a way. So then it's kind of
Mm,
finding that center. And just that's just kind of using the podcast as an
yeah.
example. But it's one of those things where you only learn by doing, and then you have to course correct a little bit. And yeah, there's no one easy answer, but for me, I just like to show up to the podcast now thinking, am I okay with every single person in my life hearing this? What's
Mm,
about to come out of my mouth? Not that they
mhm.
will, but just in case they did.
Yeah.
Am I okay with that? And if the answer is no, how can I still get the information out there in a different way? Maybe something I'm struggling with personally in a relationship of mine, I can't talk about it because it would be kind of outing somebody else's struggle that they did not consent to.
Hmm.
So, how can I get an expert on the show to talk about that thing? And I'm merely just asking the questions on behalf of the audience, but I'm not talking about my personal connection to it.
Hmm.
So, it's still getting the
Hmm.
info out there, it's still helping people, but it's also protecting my energy and my space with whatever relationship dynamic that I'm dealing with at the time.
Right, right. Because we live in this culture these days where so many people put so much, just out in the open without
Mhm.
much discernment or discretion. And the
Right.
reality is, everybody doesn't need to know everything. And
Right.
in many cases, that's not actually serving everybody involved, especially ourselves.
Right.
Because, again, we do have to be protective of ourselves. So, yeah, that balance between authenticity and, just protection.
Definitely. And you mentioned I used to do stand up for many years and I was very, very involved in the entertainment industry as a producer and writer and performer. And a big act of self-love was pivoting and letting that go, letting all those shiny objects go because I wasn't happy. Externally, I was collecting all kinds of accolades and things were going well. And there was no reason on a checklist to stop doing it. Um, but in the best moments of that lifestyle, I still felt really empty and sad, and I knew that I had to make a change, and my life has become a lot quieter and I think less shiny in a way. But I'm more happy, I'm more at peace, I am more feeling my day to day and the things that I'm doing reflects who I actually am versus who I thought I needed to be for whatever reason, validation or um, money or whatever. So yeah, that was a big self acceptance because I was very unkind to myself for a long time of like, why can't you just like this? Why can't you just like this lifestyle? Why can't you just like doing this? So many people want to be doing this. It's a very competitive industry and you're able to do it. So why don't you just suck it up and keep going because you're being ungrateful? And yeah, I had to let all of that go.
Mm, very interesting. So that's, you really reached a turning point where you had to make that decision of
Right.
choosing yourself or choosing this external validation and esteem that you were getting from everybody else.
Right.
Was that tough to do? Was it
Oh yeah.
something? Yeah.
Very, yeah, it was tough. And it's again what we kind of talked about earlier is those little nuggets of improvement. It was not a complete 180 overnight. It
Yeah.
was first acknowledging I'm not happy doing this. This is not the lifestyle that's going to work for me.
Mm,
What are the easier things I can let go? And it was this process of, okay, step one is I'm not going to do any shows that are more than an hour away from my home, and then it was, okay, next step, okay, and then that would get rid of some work on my plate, and then I would be able to ramp up something else over here. And then the next phase, okay, I'm not going to do shows that are more than 30 minutes from my home, right? Stuff like that, just
right.
incrementally, or looking at everything that I was doing and say, I don't need to be on this improv team over here. I don't need to write this second feature film over here. I'm going to say no to these things now because I'm going to start planning kind of behind the scenes of what's next for me. How am I going to replace this income and revenue with something that fits into my lifestyle more? And
Mhm.
that's when I really started focusing on the podcast and my first business, which was a gag gift business Dicks by Delanie. And those things were able to give me the lifestyle that I wanted, which was work from home, do something creative, be basically build my day the way that I wanted. And the other things on my list they were doing the complete opposite. I was on everybody else's schedule and timeline but my own.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's like this scaling back while you're ramping up something else. And being okay with that really messy, uncomfortable transition.
Right. Right. Definitely something that takes getting used to.
Yes,
If you have
yes.
even a glimmer of perfectionism, which I don't think anybody listening to this podcast is lacking.
Yes, and it sucks too. I mean, I still grieve that part of myself or that path that I said no to. I don't know if it
Mm,
ever is going to go away. I just
mm,
know that the peace that I feel now with this version of my career and myself far outweighs the pain and FOMO, I guess, that I have about the old thing that I did that, where could that have led to? In the end, it doesn't matter because I know I wasn't going to be happy. So, it's going to be a forever letting go process. And I think maybe a lot of
yeah.
people can resonate with maybe you gave up something shiny that wasn't serving you, or, a lot of people have reached out who maybe were professional dancers or actors or whatever it was that they've transitioned into something else, and how we keep that part of us alive and how we integrate it into what we do now. So there was so much I loved about it, which was, writing comedy and writing jokes. And now
Sure.
I'm integrating that into my first book deal, that the card deck and stuff's going to have lots of silly puns and jokes and things like that. And that fits better for me instead of, being out every night and every weekend on a stage saying jokes. I'm going to write them and I can do them whenever I want.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. That makes so much sense. Yeah, life is just bittersweet sometimes. It's not that there's never any sadness, but it
Yeah.
sounds like you're very clear and very content with that
Yeah.
decision. I can feel it from you.
Yeah.
So Delaney, what's the best place for people to keep track of you and everything that you've got going on?
Yes, DelanieFischer.com, DelanieFischer.com. You can find everything there, podcast stuff, information about my new projects coming out. And yeah, I think that's it.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this special self-love series. Keep on loving yourself and stay in touch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Delanie.